All right, so let's dive into something, a topic. I mean, it never really seems to go away, this whole gender pay gap thing.
Right.
We've got some new research from Pew Research Center about how things look here in the U.S., and honestly, it's a little disheartening.
Yeah, I think it is surprising
Further along by now, wouldn't you?
how persistent this issue has been.
It feels like we keep hitting the same wall.
Yeah.
The headline number for 2022 is that women earned 82 cents
Okay.
for every dollar a man earned.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
barely moved in 20 years.
Yeah.
Back then, it was 80 cents.
Not bad.
So we're making progress at a snail's pace, it seems.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
We see so much progress
Right.
in other areas of gender equality, yet the pay gap just stubbornly refuses to budge.
Right.
It really speaks to the deep-seated systemic issues that we're up against.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, are things really changing? Or are we just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic?
Exactly.
What's even more interesting is that the gap isn't the same for everyone. It
Yeah.
actually widens as women get older.
That's right.
So,
If you look at women
okay.
aged 25 to 34, they're earning 92 cents for every dollar earned by men their age.
Wow.
That's actually pretty close to parity,
Yeah.
which gives you a little hope, right?
Yeah. But then reality sets in.
Yeah.
Once women hit that 35 to 44 age range,
Uh-huh.
their earnings drop to 83 cents to the dollar?
Yeah.
That's a huge difference.
That's a big...
What's happening in that decade?
It's a crucial period in many women's lives where they're starting families.
Uh-huh.
And that brings us to the uneven impact of parenthood.
See, this is what gets me.
Right.
Mothers are less likely to be working compared to women who don't have kids at home.
Right.
And even if they are working,
Uh-huh.
they often work fewer hours.
It's true.
It's like a double whammy that
Yeah.
really hits their earning potential.
And what's striking is how the opposite seems to happen for fathers.
So fathers are actually more likely to be employed than men without kids.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they tend to work even more hours than before.
Is this because they're seen as more reliable or
Let's-
dedicated now that they're providers?
There's definitely a complex mix of factors at play.
Yeah.
But research has shown that there's a fatherhood wage premium.
Okay.
Basically, fathers often see an increase in their earnings after having children.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the system almost rewards men for becoming fathers
Right.
while penalizing women for motherhood.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how much of a choice all this really is when these larger forces are at work, right?
Right.
Okay, so we've got age and parenthood playing a role, but what about education?
Right.
You'd think that would help even the playing field.
That's a common assumption.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the data doesn't back it up. The
Oh.
pay gap exists across all education levels.
So a college degree doesn't magically fix things?
Not quite.
Okay.
In 2022, for example,
Yeah.
women who had at least a bachelor's degree still only earned 79% as much as men who also graduated college.
So even with the same level of education,
Yeah.
women are still earning less?
Right.
What does that tell us about what's really going on here?
It really highlights the fact that education, while important,
Right.
can't single-handedly overcome the deeper structural issues at play.
It seems like education alone isn't enough.
No.
And I imagine this gets even more complex when we bring race and ethnicity into the mix.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
This is where the story becomes even more concerning.
Okay.
Black and Hispanic women face the largest pay gaps of all.
The numbers are pretty stark. In 2022,
Uh-huh.
Black women earned 70% as much as white men,
Right.
and Hispanic women earned only 65%.
It's a huge difference.
That's a huge difference.
It really underscores the fact that we're not just dealing with a gender pay gap,
Right.
but with overlapping systems of inequality that disadvantage women of color in particular.
All right, so we've got this stubborn pay gap. It gets worse. As women age, parenthood seems to impact men and women in opposite ways.
Yeah.
And it's not magically fixed by getting a college degree.
Right.
Plus, it hits women of color the hardest.
Uh-huh.
Is there anything else we need to consider
Well,
about the economy in general?
that's a critical point to consider.
Doesn't that affect things too?
Larger economic trends definitely play a role because men and women are often concentrated in different jobs and industries,
Okay.
which are affected differently by things like recessions.
So, for example,
Yeah.
the Pew Research mentions how the slow recovery from the 2008 recession hit women harder,
Yeah,
And then the pandemic caused what they're calling a she-cession because so many women lost their jobs.
exactly.
Sure.
Think about the industries that were hit hardest during those periods.
Yeah.
Hospitality, retail, caregiving.
Uh-huh.
These are sectors where women make up a large portion of the workforce.
Mm.
And the impact of job losses in those areas can have a ripple effect for years to come.
Right.
Yeah. It's like these economic shocks expose the cracks in the system, and unfortunately, those cracks often run right along gender lines.
So we've got societal expectations, we've got different jobs and industries, we've got economic ups and downs. It all seems to add up to this persistent pay gap. Honestly, it's kind of overwhelming when you lay it all out like that. Where do we even begin to address this?
Yeah.
It feels like a mountain to climb.
It's definitely a multifaceted problem,
Yep.
but I wouldn't say it's insurmountable.
Okay, good.
There are concrete actions we can take both as individuals and as a society.
Okay, good. Give us some hope here.
Yeah.
What can we actually do about this?
For starters, we need to shine a light on those systemic biases we talked about.
Yeah.
One way to do that is to push for more pay transparency within companies.
Okay.
If everyone knows what everyone else is making, it's harder to hide any gender-based discrepancies.
That makes sense. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? What else can we do at that systemic level?
We also need to ensure that women have equal access to training and advancement opportunities.
Okay.
Too often, women are passed over for promotions or not given the same chances to develop their skills.
So it's not just about getting hired, it's about what happens once you're in the door. Are there opportunities to grow and move up?
Exactly. And speaking of opportunities, let's not forget about affordable childcare.
Oh, yeah.
This is a huge factor for working mothers.
I can only imagine childcare costs are through the roof these days.
They are. And when the cost of childcare is almost as much as a second income, it's no wonder many women are forced to choose between their careers and their families.
It shouldn't be an either-or situation. We need policies that support both working and parenting.
Couldn't agree more. Affordable, accessible childcare would be a game changer for so many women. And while we're on the subject of policies, let's not forget about paid family leave.
Mm-hmm.
The U.S. is way behind other developed countries in this area.
I did not realize that we're the only ones without a national paid leave policy.
One of very few.
Yes.
And that lack of support puts an enormous burden on families, especially women. Having access to paid leave allows parents to bond with their children without worrying about losing their jobs or income. It benefits everyone.
Okay, so tackling pay transparency, equal access to opportunities, affordable childcare, and paid family leave, these are all big picture things that would make a huge difference. What about at a more individual level? What can we do in our own lives to chip away at this problem?
Well, for one, we can start by challenging those ingrained gender stereotypes that limit women's choices and potential. We need to encourage girls and young women to pursue any career they set their minds on, even those traditionally dominated by men.
Yes, more women in STEM, more women in leadership positions, representation matters. If you can see it, you can be it, right?
Exactly. When girls see successful women in these roles, it expands their sense of what's possible for them.
Yeah.
It plants the seed that they can achieve anything they set their minds to.
So it's about supporting those aspirations from a young age and then making sure that once women are in those fields, they have the support they need to thrive.
Right. It's about creating workplaces that are truly inclusive and equitable, where women have equal opportunities to advance and reach their full potential. And that means addressing things like bias in hiring and promotion decisions.
Because that bias is still there lurking beneath the surface, even if people aren't always aware of it.
It is. We all have unconscious biases.
Yeah.
And we need to be intentional about recognizing and challenging them.
So things like mentorship programs, sponsorship opportunities for women, and creating a work culture where everyone feels valued and respected. These are all important pieces of the puzzle.
They are. It's about creating an environment where everyone can bring their whole selves to work and feel empowered to succeed.
That's a great way to put it. It's not just about women fitting into a male-dominated workplace. It's about creating a new kind of workplace where everyone has a chance to shine.
And let's be clear, closing the gender pay gap isn't just about fairness for women.
Right.
It's about creating a better, more prosperous society for everyone.
Preach. When women succeed, everyone benefits.
Precisely. It's about recognizing the value that women bring to the table and ensuring that they are fairly compensated for their contributions.
Okay, so we've talked about big systemic changes, individual actions, but what does this all mean for you, our listener, who's taking the time to really dive into this topic? What can you do with this information?
I think it's about connecting the dots between the big picture and your own life.
I love when you do that. So how do we connect those dots? What can our listeners take away from this conversation and apply to their own lives?
Well, we can start by examining our own beliefs and behaviors.
Okay.
Do we unconsciously perpetuate gender stereotypes?
Uh-huh.
Are we advocating for equal opportunities in our workplaces and communities?
Are we speaking up when we see or hear something that's not right?
That's a big one.
Hmm.
It's easy to stay silent, but using your voice can make a difference. And remember, even small actions can have a ripple effect.
It can feel daunting, but change has to start somewhere, right?
It does, and it often starts with those small individual acts of courage. It's about recognizing the power we each have to make a difference, even in our own little corner of the world.
So what are some examples of those small but meaningful actions? What can our listeners do in their daily lives to challenge this inequality?
Well, it could be as simple as being mindful of the language we use.
Okay.
Do we unknowingly reinforce gender stereotypes in our conversations? Are we using inclusive language?
Mm-hmm.
It's about paying attention to those little things that can often go unnoticed but have a cumulative impact.
So catching ourselves when we make assumptions or say things that perpetuate those old-fashioned gender roles?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Or how about supporting women-owned businesses?
Oh, yeah.
By choosing to spend our money with companies that prioritize gender equality, we're sending a powerful message about the kind of world we want to create.
And it's not just about where we spend our money. It's about who we support with our time and energy. Are we mentoring young women in our fields? Are we advocating for policies that promote gender equality?
Those are all fantastic ways to contribute. And let's not underestimate the power of simply amplifying the voices of women in our workplaces and communities.
Yeah.
Sharing their stories, celebrating their achievements, and making sure they have a seat at the table are all ways to make a difference.
It's about being an ally, being a champion for change. We can all do that in our own way.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that this isn't just a women's issue.
Right.
It's a societal issue that affects us all.
Yeah.
And it's going to take all of us working together to create a more equitable future.
Okay. That feels empowering. Like we can actually do something, even if it's just a small step. It all adds up. So to wrap up this deep dive on the gender pay gap, let's leave our listeners with one final thought to ponder. We've covered a lot of ground, from the systemic factors driving the gap to the individual actions we can take.
We've seen how persistent this issue is, how it weaves its way through every aspect of our society. But we've also seen how much potential there is for change.
Exactly. We're not powerless in the face of this challenge. There is hope. So our final thought for you, dear listener, is this. What will your contribution be? What small but meaningful step will you take to challenge gender bias and promote equality in your own sphere of influence?
We challenge you to think about that question, to let it simmer in your mind. Because every action, no matter how small, brings us closer to that future where equal pay for equal work is not a dream but a reality.
That's it for our deep dive into the gender pay gap. Thank you for joining us. Let's all go out there and make a difference.